Today at the National Press Club, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. With the war in the Middle East causing global ramifications, the federal government has announced a raft of measures to combat the oil crisis. Mr Albanese will outline how he plans to address further challenges. Here's the Prime Minister with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia on Ngunnawal country for today's Westpac address. I'm Jane Norman, the ABC's National Affairs correspondent and a board director here at the club. Our guest today is the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, fresh from his nationally televised address last night, here at the club for his first press club address of the year. Now, it's a little later than usual, but there's been a little more than usual going on. The conflict in the Middle East triggering the worst, one of, if not the worst, energy crises we've ever experienced, disrupting global oil supplies and sending petrol and diesel prices soaring. With the Strait of Hormuz still closed, Australia is sourcing its fuel from further and further afield. But in the middle of all of this uncertainty and volatility, the government's putting together what the Prime Minister says will be its most ambitious budget yet. To hear all about it, please welcome the Prime Minister.
Well, thanks very much, Jane, and I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I want to acknowledge all my wonderful colleagues who are here with me today, particularly the Deputy Prime Minister, the Treasurer, the Foreign Minister and other ministerial colleagues and members of the caucus, members of the Diplomatic Corps who are here with us today as well, and importantly members of the business community, as well as, of course, as you would expect at the National Press Club, members of the Press Gallery. This is a testing time for our nation. The war in the Middle East has caused the biggest increase in petrol and diesel prices in history. Australia is not an active participant in this war. We did express support for the original objectives, preventing Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon and degrading its capacity to endanger its neighbours. Despite its indiscriminate attacks across the region, Iran's air force is degraded, its navy is degraded, its military industrial base is degraded, and so too is its capacity to launch missiles. That is a good thing. And now those objectives have been realised, it is not clear what more needs to be achieved or what the end point looks like. What is clear is that the longer the war goes on, the more significant the impact on the global economy will be. Not just the price of fuel, but everything that relies upon fuel, literally everything that moves. We started seeing those price spikes the day that the Strait of Hormuz closed. And we will still be dealing with these challenges even after it is open. This war may be on the other side of the world, but it's causing real pain here for farmers, truckies, small businesses and families. Our government understands this and we're acting on it. While we cannot control when this conflict in the Middle East will end, we can determine how we respond here in Australia, and we can decide how we work together to help each other through. We can choose what we build together so we come out of this stronger, more self-reliant and more resilient. And that is what I want to focus on today. The immediate actions we're taking to secure our fuel supply and to shield our economy. The preparations we're undertaking as the situation evolves. And every bit as importantly, the changes we need to make to prepare our economy for the future. We do not need to wait for this global crisis to be over to learn its lessons. We can and we must act now to keep jobs here and create new ones, to strengthen our economic sovereignty, our energy security and our national resilience, to make the most of our resources and make more things here, so that Australia is not always the last link in the global supply chain, that instead we stand on our own 2 feet. We navigate global uncertainty our way, the Australian way, looking after people, holding true to our values of fairness, aspiration and opportunity for all, and holding on to everything that brings us together as Australians and sets us apart from the world, everything that makes this the best country on earth. Now, I understand that when people hear the economic impacts of this moment compared to the pandemic, they flash back to the harsh restrictions of those times. That's why I'm taking every opportunity in the Parliament, at press conferences, on social media, in last night's address, and here at the National Press Club, to make it clear to all Australians that while there are significant challenges ahead and common sense changes required, this will not be like COVID, partly because the nature of this global crisis is very different, but also because we've learned from that time and we are deliberately taking a different approach. You can see that with the National Fuel Security Plan adopted by National Cabinet, making sure that leaders at all levels of government and from both sides of politics are on the same page, taking sensible steps now so we're better prepared for what is ahead, and being clear about what we want life to look like here in Australia, even as the global situation becomes more challenging, so we do not have a repeat of the social dislocation of COVID, when people's financial stress and anxiety about the world was compounded by being cut off from family and friends and community, and trust in government and institutions was eroded by rules that seemed both completely inflexible and constantly changing. Our focus is keeping Australia moving and keeping Australia open, keeping our schools open, keeping national and local sport going, major events and community festivals vibrant and strong, keeping hospitality and all those industries that rely on people getting together open for business, making sure we can still spend time with our loved ones and friends at Easter, and that we come together as a nation to pay our respects on Anzac Day. Keeping Australia moving means keeping our truckies on the road, our miners and tradies on site, making sure essential workers can be there for the people who count on them, and making sure our farmers and growers and producers can keep getting their food and fibre into supermarkets and onto ships for export. We're encouraging a voluntary, common sense approach. Take working from home, for example. For many families, this is already an essential part of the weekly routine. And where it works for businesses and individuals, it makes sense. We're also encouraging people who can catch public transport but currently choose to drive to make the switch, because that builds our reserves and saves fuel for people who have no choice but to drive. People in areas without reliable public transport, hospital nurses and shift workers commuting at all hours, or tradies who need their ute to do their job. To keep Australia moving, our government has moved quickly. We've cut the fuel excise in half for 3 months, cutting the tax on petrol and diesel by 26 cents per litre. And this morning, importantly, we have reached agreement with the states and territories to deliver a further cut in the fuel tax by returning their GST windfall to Australians. What this means, give the states and territories a clap. This will mean a combined saving of 32 cents on every litre. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has already signed that change into law, because we want this added relief to start showing up at petrol stations straight away. For our truckies, we're cutting the heavy vehicle road user charge to zero. We've taken unprecedented action to underwrite industry and bring shiploads more fuel and fertiliser to Australia. We've changed the law so that all the fuel made in Australian refineries stays on shore. We've given the ACCC new powers to crack down on petrol stations that do the wrong thing by their customers. And we will pursue every option to ensure the increases that might be there in coal or gas prices do not flow into electricity prices. Today I announced that under our Economic Resilience Program, we will make available $1 billion in interest-free loans for manufacturing and fuel businesses dealing with the economic costs of this conflict, truckies, freight companies and fuel and fertiliser producers. These firms are not just being affected by this global crisis, they are essential to Australia getting through this crisis as well. So our government will extend their credit to help them and the farmers and producers who rely on these supply chains to weather the storm. This is just another way we're acting to get ahead of issues. No government can promise to eliminate the pressures the global crisis will impose, but we can be a buffer against the worst of it, a shock absorber in a time of global shocks. And we will do everything we can to protect the Australian people from what the world throws at us. Providing stability and security amidst uncertainty does not mean standing still while the world changes around us. It means anticipating and creating change, true to Australian values and in Australia's interests. Because if people feel like the economy isn't working for them, if they're putting in the effort but they're not seeing the reward, if planning for the future feels like a luxury, then government cannot provide stability just by keeping things as they are. There is no security in maintaining a status quo that doesn't work for people. Economic reform that drives growth, boosts productivity, helps tackle inflation and lifts living standards is always necessary. And in times of uncertainty such as this, it is urgent. We all know the mindset that left Australia exposed to this global shock, that said it was okay to cut TAFE and training, to dare manufacturing and industry to go offshore, to put multinational firms ahead of Australian gas users, to close our refineries, store our fuel reserves in Texas and run the national energy grid into the ground. And that Australia could get away with this because there would always be someone else, somewhere else, who would sell us what we needed cheaper than we could make it ourselves. This approach put our nation in this position of vulnerability. It certainly will not take us out of it. And that is why our government is taking a different path, investing in a future made in Australia, creating the National Reconstruction Fund to back manufacturing, making free TAFE permanent and creating new incentives for apprentices, bringing new energy online, cleaner, cheaper power that we generate, store and control for ourselves, positioning Australia as a destination of choice for the new jobs and opportunities of data centres and artificial intelligence, establishing our critical minerals strategic reserve, securing the future of our industrial base, from the steelworks at Whyalla to the Boyne Island smelter at Gladstone, strengthening our defence manufacturing and our security cooperation, restoring Australian leadership in the Pacific and deepening our connections in ASEAN and APEC, investing in the jobs and skills and infrastructure for AUKUS, a landmark security treaty with Indonesia, a new alliance, our first since 1951, with Papua New Guinea, and importantly, diversifying our trade links and economic partnerships too, because making more things in Australia doesn't mean doing less in the world. That's why we've been engaging in our region, stabilising our relationship with China and finding new opportunities for cooperation with India and the United Arab Emirates. The critical minerals agreement I signed at the White House, the defence technology partnership we're expanding with Canada, and of course, our new defence and security partnership and our free trade agreement signed just last week with the European Union, giving Australian farmers and growers and exporters new access to a market of 450 million people. We were investing in Australia's economic resilience well before the conflict in the Middle East began. And for our government, international uncertainty is not an excuse to delay or hold back reform. It is the reason we must press ahead, because we will not generate the same prosperity or create the same opportunities if we continue to rely on an economic model designed in a different time and built for a more predictable world. nor can we go back to those days. And any party or leader who promises otherwise, anyone who pretends that the solution to housing or jobs or wages or health is to somehow recreate the 1950s or 60s, or whatever time they imagine everything was hunky-dory, is simply not being fair dinkum with the Australian people. Australia will not find our future security in the past or by copying approaches from overseas. We have to invest in it, build it and create it ourselves. We can, we must and we will. Because the global shocks we have hit this decade are not passing storms, they are the extremes of a more volatile economic climate, where economic policy and national security are bound together, and where international supply chains are instruments of economic and strategic competition. Australia can do better than respond to this reality. We can thrive in it by investing in our unique and unbeatable combination of advantages: our traditional resources, our critical minerals and our clean energy, our trade ties and diaspora connections to our region and to the world, our stability, our democracy, our standing as a middle power and trusted partner, the investing power of our superannuation funds, and the skills and capability of our people, from digital technology and advanced manufacturing to agriculture and the care economy. In a world that is less certain, our national strengths are more valuable than they've ever been, but only if we continue to be serious and strategic about building on them. And even as we plan and build for this stronger, more resilient future, our number one priority remains helping people with the cost of living. And that is the balance that we will strike in next month's budget. It is our government's most important budget to date, and it will be our most ambitious. It has to be. The scale of the challenge facing us and the breadth of opportunities ahead of us demands that ambition and that urgency. And our Australian character demands that ambition too. That's what I mean when I talk about progressive patriotism, uniting to celebrate what we have, but working together to make it better, recognising that because we live in the best country in the world, we have a responsibility to build for the best and to empower every Australian with the opportunity to be their best as a matter of national pride and in order to realise our national potential. Some of you have probably heard me say before that you have to be prepared to learn something new every day. And one of the things that I've learned in the 4 years I've had the extraordinary honour of serving as Australia's Prime Minister is that no matter how consuming an issue appears, you can't just drop everything else. You have to keep up the tempo on other issues. You have to maintain that momentum of delivery. And that's why, in the same week that we cut the fuel excise in half, we delivered on our promise to ban surcharges on credit and debit cards. We backed wage rises for 18, 19 and 20-year-olds who, for the first time, will be paid like the adults that they are. We legislated against subscription traps. And today I announce we will build on the reforms that we've already delivered to combat gambling harm. Between 6 a.m. and 8:30 p.m, we will cap the number of TV ads for betting agencies at a maximum of 3 per hour. We will ban all gambling ads on radio during school pickup and drop-off. We will ban cross-promotion content that mixes commentary with odds. We'll end advertising on jerseys and jumpers and in stadiums, and will ban online advertising unless the user is verified as being over 18 and has the ability to opt out. Just as importantly, we will block illegal offshore gaming sites and ban online Keno-type products the so-called pocket pokies, which represent a huge percentage of Australian gambling losses. And we will keep building on the success of BetStop, promoting and strengthening a program that is changing lives. We are getting the balance right, letting adults have a punt if they want to, but making sure that our children don't see betting ads everywhere they look. Because we don't want kids growing up thinking that footy and gambling are inextricably linked. We want Australians to love sport for what it is. Its joys, its heartbreak, 43 years between comps for South Sydney, its highs and its lows. Because that is more than enough for any of us. To succeed in all that is ahead of us, we need to bring people with us. And that's why when I stood here after the next election, I said that the following 12 months would be a year of delivery, working through the commitments that the Australian people voted for last May and ticking them off one by one. 134 out of 137 Medicare urgent care clinics we promised are open, together with 54 Medicare mental health centres. And our new Medicare mental health check-in service went live just yesterday. 1-800 Medicare has been up since January 1. And all 33 of our endo and pelvic pain clinics will be open by the end of this month. Over 1,300 more GP clinics are bulk billing every patient every time, driving the biggest jump in the bulk billing rate in over 2 decades. PBS medicines are at their lowest price since 2004, just $25. 230,000 Australians have purchased their first home with a 5% deposit. When I came to the Press Club last January, I announced a new $10,000 incentive for construction apprentices. In the last 6 months, 11,000 Australians have seized that opportunity. For the first time ever, full and fair funding for every student in every school in every state and territory is becoming a reality. And over 61,000 nursing, teaching and social work students have benefited from paid prac. There have been nearly 750,000 enrolments in free TAFE. More Australians are starting university than ever before. And 3 million people with a student debt have had it cut by 20%, saving an average of over $5,500. Over 300,000 homes and small businesses have cut their power bills with a cheaper battery. The gender pay gap is at an all-time low, and 14 million taxpayers will get a tax cut on the 1st of July this year and again next year. All these acts of delivery, doing what we said we would do, helping people under pressure, they also build trust, not just trust in our government, trust in all governments, in our capacity to make a positive difference in people's lives. In a more polarised and fragmented media landscape, that is only becoming more important, because there is no speech, no ad, no interview that can make a better case for the value of government than someone being able to see a doctor for free close to home. That's the reality our conversation must be grounded in. Change that people can see positive change in their lives. For a Labor government, economic reform is never an end in itself. It's only the means to an end, to ensuring more people know the dignity of a good job and fair wages, schools and childcare that give your child the best start in life, the opportunity of TAFE or university, healthcare your family can count on and afford, a home of your own. The intergenerational equity at the heart of the oldest and most Australian aspiration of them all, passing on greater opportunity to your children. That is how we bring people with us. It is also where we want to go, to an economy that is stronger and fairer, stronger because it is fairer, because people have a share in our nation's success, a meaningful stake in our economy and a stake in their future, and a society that is stronger because everyone knows they're a part of it. People in every part of our country, from all faiths and backgrounds, valued for who they are and for all they contribute. That has always been the key to the success of the Australian model. It is how we have been able to avoid the worst of the economic and social divisions that have taken hold elsewhere. We take pride in that because we know it's not down to luck or distance or natural immunity. It's because of what we build here for ourselves: a strong minimum wage, universal Medicare, dignity and security in retirement through superannuation, a democracy where nearly every citizen casts a vote, the first place in the world where women could vote in elections and stand for Parliament. And just as our national unity is built on respect for each other, it also depends on people knowing the nation respects them, that your effort is worth it, that if you work hard and back yourself, government will have your back. And nowhere is that more important than the great Australian aspiration of home ownership, the foundation on which you can build a better life for yourself and your family. That is an enduring mission that demands constant renewal, continual reform, new effort and urgency to break down the barriers of disadvantage, open the doors of opportunity, liberate the talents and capacity of the Australian people, and ensure that every part of our economy nourishes aspiration and rewards hard work. That is the Australian way, and it is our way through this global crisis. It is how we make our way forward with no one held back and no one left behind. Thanks very much.
Prime Minister, thank you for your address today. It's very detailed and lots of questions will be coming from the journalists here today. But I wanted to start by asking about the crisis we're currently in and the wake-up call that I feel it's presented Australia. As you say, we're an island nation. We import the vast majority of our liquid fuels. We're at the end of a very long supply chain. So I'm wondering, what is your government's long-term plan to make Australia either self-sufficient or far more self-sufficient when it comes to liquid fuels?
We have to be more self-sufficient and less vulnerable. We had, fortunately, at the beginning of this global crisis, we had the largest fuel reserves that we'd had in Australia for 15 years. And importantly, our fuel reserves were here, not in the United States. Now, 6 of our refineries were open when we left office in 2013. When we came back in 2022, there were 2. So if you look at what we've done, whether it's in Mount Isa, Whyalla, Nearstar in Tasmania, Gladstone, we have been prepared to intervene and not just say, oh, well, we'll just let the market operate and we won't worry about what happens because we'll be right, we'll get stuff from somewhere else. We've been prepared to intervene to make sure that we are more resilient and self-reliant. That's what the Critical Minerals Strategic Reserve that we announced during the last campaign was about as well. So it's that principle of a future made in Australia that I spoke about prior to 2022. I spoke about on this very platform, one of the speeches I gave as opposition leader. And it's that theme that we'll continue to work on. How do we deal with these issues? So partly, one of the things we've done this week, for example, is to increase the Finance Minister's emergency fund, if you like, so that she has a greater capacity. There's some smaller improvements that we can make to potentially produce more diesel here. We're looking at all of those options.
Increasing capacity, more refineries. What are the kind of practical ways?
Well, we're looking at all of those options, but it all needs to start with the principle of we can't assume, as I said in the speech, that we'll get it from somewhere else because it's cheaper somewhere else and this market will operate, that is the world that we're in. We are not. We're in a world where economic relationships are linked to national security. We need to continue to that. So if you like, the principle that we were elected on in 2022, which included in, I think it was the first or maybe the second budget reply I did, I announced the National Reconstruction Fund. It was about making more things here. It was about being more resilient. And it's that principle that, if anything, we need to now turbocharge rather than back away from. But we got, I think we were right in drawing that distinction prior to our election. We've been putting in place those measures since then in a range of areas, but we'll continue to do so.
Okay, let's go to our journalist, Michelle Grattan from the Conversation, rather.
Prime Minister, there have been many calls for a super profits tax to take advantage of enhanced gas exports. What's your view of that sort of tax? How do you see the pros and the cons of it?
I think it needs to be viewed in the context of where we are now. So one of the things that we've been very clear about, for example, is that just as we expect countries that supply us to stick to agreements which are there, we think it's very important that the contracts that we have be fulfilled completely with countries in our region. That's the quid pro quo, if you like. And I think that is very important as we go forward. So our priority, to be clear, our first priority is supply. Supply depends upon those relationships being adhered to. And some of the commentary that is there ignores a whole range of the issues. They take some select areas, pretend that there isn't a return to the Australian people from the resources sector, which is there, which is a real strength for us. So we'll continue to engage. The tax priority, the only tax policy that the government has adopted at the moment, of course, is the income tax cut that comes in on July 1.
Thank you.
Our next question is Dom Giannini from AOP.
Thank you for your address, Prime Minister. Going back to the gambling announcement, a lot of the recommendations in the Murphy report haven't been addressed yet. A lot of them around harm minimisation, a levy to fund online gambling harm reduction, a duty of care, national regulators, stuff like that. Can you please explain why you haven't addressed those principles in this announcement and whether or how soon you're going to release a full response to the Murphy report?
We will be tabling a response to the Murphy report on the first day that Parliament comes back, when it returns. Cabinet adopted these positions today. This is the position that we will take forward in legislation when Parliament resumes. One of the things that people are looking for here is certainty, and the government decides positions, not committees. Government can be informed by committees, but the government determines positions. And one of the things that sporting codes need, dare I say it, here at the National Press Club, TV channels that have broadcasting deals, all of that is tied up with certainty going forward. And what we will do is present a final position that we have. It's informed as well by the key elements going forward. Some of it is about the Murphy report, but the Murphy report isn't when it started and ended. And when we look at gambling as well, one of the things that I've said to some of the advocates, overwhelmingly, more than half of problem gambling is about poker machines. That's not covered by any of this at all. And so we will deal with things appropriately. With regard to a duty of care, we're considering a duty of care when it comes to online that's much broader than just this. So it's that context of reform is what we'll be taking forward.
Thank you.
Next question is from Phil Puri from the Australian Financial Review.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, PM. Look, just back to Jane's question, PM, on full fuel security. The 2019 election, your predecessor, Bill Shorten, had a policy to restore our fuel stocks to 90 days in accordance with the IEA requirement. The import fuel stocks, it was opposed then by the then government as prohibitively expensive. Is that, when you said to Jane, you're looking at everything, is it your intention to try and return those stocks to 90 days? And do you think people now, experiencing what they're experiencing, may be prepared to say cop a levy at the Bowser when prices return to normal to help fund it?
Well, just bear in mind that the 90-day reserve considered by the IEA isn't a reserve for domestic use. It's a reserve, as we've seen at the moment, for a global crisis to be released. So that's why it's there. One of the things about Australia, because of the size of our continent, is that the cost would be around about $20 billion annually. And the other thing is, because fuel can't be just kept, it has to be topped up. Then the challenge for us is very different from a smaller country in Europe, for example, that has a larger population. We certainly will consider what we can to increase our fuel security. We've been doing that. That's why at the beginning of this crisis we had the largest reserves in 15 years. So we'll consider all those measures, but in a practical way going forward as well, because you've got to look at opportunity costs as well of what the best method is to increase fuel security. That is certainly what we'll be examining. Without, 2019 is a long time ago. We've moved on, and we'll continue to examine what is the best policy to further increase that security. So there's a range of measures, there's biofuels, there's a range of new technologies as well that can add to our security.
Cheers.
Claire Armstrong from ABC News.
Thanks, Prime Minister, for your address. In announcing these gambling reforms, you've pitched it as protecting Australian children. Australian adults lose about $32 billion a year to gambling. It's the highest per capita in the world. One of the measures talked about in the Murphy report is actually a full ban on ads. Something that ACMA has found is that partial bans tend to result in more ads being played when they are allowed. So why are you confident that these partial advertising restrictions that you've announced will actually deliver the protections not just for future generations, but the current one that is losing billions of dollars a year?
Well, more ads can't be played. That's the point behind having a restriction. From the average, when we were talking about a couple of years ago, in 2024, for example, were eight. So 3 years is obviously cutting it by more than half. It's about getting that balance right, and the nature of it as well is that if a footy player is running around with a gambling company on their football jumper, that's not 8 an hour that there was. That's constant for the 80 minutes plus injury time that a game's going on. We think we have got the balance right. I think that going forward, this is a significant reform. It's the most, to be clear, is the most significant reform on gambling that has ever been implemented, following previously the most significant reform that gambling had ever had, which was what we did in our first term.
Paul Sakal from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age.
Thanks for moderating, Jane. Prime Minister, the President of the US has just spoken as you were getting up. I'm not sure if you've been briefed yet. You can take my question as being nearly verbatim quotes. He says that the US's war and efforts there are nearing completion. He also says a week after raising the prospect of a deal with Iran that might have opened the Straits, he now says it's on allies who need to use the Straits, which obviously we very much do need to. It's on allies to take the lead in terms of opening up the Straits. I wonder what your response is to his comments.
Well, with respect, Paul, as much as I trust every journalist in this room, it's a bit hard to comment on President Trump's statement, which was I think done in part while I was sitting up here. But my position I've made very clear, which is we do want to see a de-escalation. As I said in my speech, the objectives of that President Trump outlined at the time of him launching the action against Iran have largely been achieved, and we want to see a de-escalation. We want to also see it taken into account the economic costs that this is having right around the world.
Happy that it is nearing completion? Is that a welcome sign?
I think that's totally consistent with what we are seeing, or what I've said, which is I want to see a de-escalation. Yes.
Greg Brown from The Australian.
Prime Minister, in your speech you talked a lot about ambitious reform, but it seemed to me it was through the prism of economic resilience. Is that what you're defining the reform in this budget as being about? So is that going to be a bigger focus than, for example, some of the tax reform measures that have been floated? And with taking that into account, do Australians need to get used to a bigger role for government over the coming years compared to the Hawke and Keating era that you say we need to move on from?
I fully respect the reforms that the Hawke and Keating government implemented. They led to decades of prosperity here in Australia because they opened up our economy at a time where we had globalisation and global trade and relationships between trading nations which stuck. The WTO, the emergence of the creation of APEC, which was in part an Australian creation, free trade agreements. What we're seeing now is a very different world, and Australia has to respond to that. And when it comes to economic resilience, it means two things. It means not being at the end of supply chains, so the establishment of a Future Made in Australia agenda, but it also means, as my speech said as well, it's about that social licence and social cohesion as well, giving people a stake in the economy. I think that is very much a part of economic resilience as well. Young people feeling like they can get a fair crack. That's why we did the student debt relief. That's why we need to look at issues including whether younger generations think they'll ever get into home ownership. Those issues are all important of economic reform, and we'll examine that intergenerational equity aspect of reform, just as we've done an extraordinary amount of work on gender equity, whether it be the largest women's health program that Australia has ever seen by a big margin. You know, can you imagine the other mob coming up with, or even thinking, or even getting on the agenda, endo and pelvic pain clinics? Like, it just wouldn't have happened. And so the whole range of things that we have done, I mean, I found it remarkable that there had been no new contraceptives put on the PBS for 30 years. You know, if there's a bunch of blokes sitting around the cabinet room, maybe that's what happens. But it doesn't happen in a government that has a majority of women around the cabinet room and a majority of women in our caucus.
But given the world has changed, as you said, economists are calling for government spending to be pulled back to make more room for the private sector. Do you think this is actually inconsistent with what you view as the geostrategic reality, and that government spending will need to be expanded to make some of these investments?
Not at all. You've done well there to sneak in an extra one, but congratulations on that, Greg. Not at all. We'll continue to look for sensible savings. We've had $114 billion, I think the figure is, of savings so far. We've saved massive amounts in terms of where debt would have been and where it was projected to be. We produced 2 budget surpluses and lower deficits than they anticipated when they handed down their budget in March 2022. We'll continue to have savings in this budget, as much as there are only 2 sorts of people in my cabinet, those who are on the ERC and those who are glad they're not, because they have more time.
Okay, our next question is Andrew Probyn from the Nine Network.
Prime Minister, Donald Trump in recent days and weeks has abused his oldest allies. He started a war without consulting those allies, and he's used military assets that have Australians serving on them, including nuclear submarines. What work needs to be done to rescue the social licence for the $350 billion AUKUS pact?
The US alliance is our most important. That remains the case. And we've relied upon it. 1951 was when it was formalised, but the truth is it was really formalised in World War II by John Curtin when he said Australia looks to America. And ever since then, they're our most important military partner. The AUKUS relationship makes sense for us. If you look at what we are doing, whether it be the nuclear-powered submarines that we'll be building at Osborne in South Australia, whether you look at the work, job creation and flow-on benefit for high-value manufacturing in Western Australia in particular, but also the reports today of my friend, the Defence Minister, working with his German counterpart when he was here, going to look at, Ghost Bat and Ghost Shark, the development of these new technologies, Australia exporting, not just becoming more self-reliant on defence. The AUKUS relationships are at a part of that. So one of the things that my government is really proud of is that we have cemented our relationships with our traditional partners, the United States and the United Kingdom, but we haven't said that's enough. We actually recognise we've repaired the relationship with China. We have strengthened the relationships with ASEAN nations, cemented the ties with our North Asia trading partners, South Korea and Japan, as well as the role that we're playing in the Pacific Island Forum, and looking towards the emerging superpowers, India and Indonesia, for the opportunities that that presents.
But do you concede that Donald Trump has damaged the social licence for AUKUS?
People will have different views of
I'm seeking yours.
President Trump. Well, my job as Australian Prime Minister is to develop relationships with world leaders. That's what I do. And that is what I have done. With some scepticism from some of your colleagues over whether I could do that or not. We're able to talk. We've had 3 face-to-face engagements, multiple phone calls. That's important because it's in Australia's national interest.
Trudy McIntosh from Sky News.
Prime Minister, to continue the theme of President Trump, you said at the start of your address here it's not clear what more needs to be achieved when it comes to Iran. So to be clear, is your message that you want this war to end now, or can you live with the 2 to 3 week timeframe that the President has laid out?
Well, to be clear, as I've said, and people are aware, Australia wasn't consulted before this began. The United States is a sovereign state, and they are the world's largest economy. And President Trump, I think, will continue to make announcements. What I have said very clearly, though, is that I do want to see a de-escalation, and I want there to be recognition as well, greater clarity about how this ends. And I haven't seen, to be fair, the timing of President Trump's speech, so I'm reluctant to talk about what he's the content of his speech, but I've been pretty consistent about this as well, that we need to account for what the end point is here and what the objectives are, and that the objectives that were originally put forward by President Trump, I think, have largely been realised.
Our next question is Mark Riley from 7 News.
Mark Riley from 7. Prime Minister, your address to the nation last night. The previous 2, during COVID, Scott Morrison announced $18 billion underwriting the economy, JobKeeper. In the global financial crisis, Kevin Rudd announced about $10 billion, including stimulus checks to families.
People have forgotten one.
The economy.
People have forgotten one. The previous address to the nation was after Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth died, and I gave it.
There we are. In your second address to the nation last night, Prime Minister, well, and on the basis of the two in crises, and maybe the Queen's death is a crisis of sorts, both the Prime Ministers announced significant packages underpinning the economy. We're now in a fuel crisis that's threatening the economy. You've laid out a fairly cogent case for that. So, two things. Why no detail in that address last night? Why just a group hug? And secondly, are you considering some cash stimulus for families, as your predecessors did in similar circumstances, as part of that cost of living relief?
I make 2 points. One is the details in the National Fuel Security Plan. That was agreed. Second point I'd make is that the world's different from when I had the privilege of serving as a minister in the Rudd government. One of the things that's occurred in recent weeks during this global crisis is the amount of misinformation that's out there. People now, with due respect to Channel 7 News or anything else, used to get their information from 7 or 9 or ABC or 10 or SBS. They'd get their information there, and there would be a consistency about it. Now, they're getting it on their device. It's telling them all sorts of things that aren't true. They're also, we have, unlike during COVID, where you won't find anything, any old talking points sent out to shadow ministers while I was leader, such as the talking points that were distributed by the leader of the opposition's office just yesterday, telling people essentially to talk up the issue of difficulties when it comes to fuel. You won't find that. We acted responsibly. So I took the opportunity to talk directly to the nation. That is more important than ever, because the nature of noise that is out there, the conspiracy theories that are out there, which are allowed, which propagate, which we can't do anything about. And, we can't wish the world was back so that everyone got their news at 6 p.m. or 5 or 7 when they watch TV at night, or they all read their paper that they held in their hands. And because of that, it is now more important than ever that people take every opportunity. I mean, this week we've had more than, I think, 24 questions yesterday, and we've had more questions in the last fortnight. I've allowed or encouraged question time to go for as long as possible. I've held full-scale press conferences Friday, Saturday, Monday, over and over. I'm here at the National Press Club on Holy Thursday. I'm taking every opportunity to try to put out facts about where we're at and to show people that we do have a plan. There's no need for people to go and fill up jerry cans and put them on the back of utes and go off and do that as well. And that's why directly talking to people is an important opportunity, and I think was worth 3 minutes and 17 seconds to do so.
I'm sorry, the stimulus payments?
Well, we'll have a budget in May. We'll have a budget. It's 5 weeks away. We're working through all of those issues. But I'll tell you what a stimulus payment is. It's a tax cut that's coming in July. It's the difference that we've made in terms of fuel security of 32 cents off every litre. It's the difference that we're making as well in the heavy vehicle road user charge that will have a downward pressure on everything that is on those heavy vehicles as well. So we will always look at cost of living measures, a range of which have kicked in this year, including the ones that I outlined in the speech. But the May budget, of course, is an opportunity as well for us to outline savings, investments and a way forward.
Ellen Ransley from the Courier Mail.
Thanks, PM. Just to follow up on Rals's question, I just wanted to refer you to a comment that was left under your video on Facebook last night that has about 2,700
That's always,
likes.
always a mistake. Never read the comments.
I think this one taps into the national mood, if you'll allow me. Hello, Prime Minister. Please reserve addresses to the nation for things of importance such as a declaration of war, an announcement of a pandemic or lockdowns, or something of national significance. Reassurance for the public can be done as a social media campaign or press conference. Being told hours in advance that our national leader is going to address us on our television sets at a predetermined time slot can cause a lot of anxiety for people thinking that it's going to be something dire. For 8 hours yesterday, we heard people were going out to the Bowser, fearing fuel rationing, preparing to work from home. There was a lot of anxiety in the community in that 8-hour window. Do you accept that in trying to quell fears and calm people down, it did inadvertently cause some panic?
I spoke to your editor, as I spoke to every editor yesterday afternoon. We had, myself and Chris Bowen, had a off-the-record briefing about what we were doing, what the context was. We continued to, and that was very constructive. We did everything we could to try to get the message out there, but I refer to previous answer, we need to talk directly. The truth is that the demand spike in fuel had occurred, was continuing to occur. There hasn't been a single ship that was due to arrive in Australia in March that had not arrived. And in addition to that, what we had done of changing the fuel standards for both diesel and petrol meant there was more supply than there would be otherwise, and the 20% release of the reserves meant there was more supply on top of that. So quite clearly, there was an issue that we needed to deal with, and I will take every opportunity to talk to the Australian people directly, because that is showing them respect. And I respect everyone's right to have a comment and a view, but a social media post didn't stop the, in some cases, 100% increase in demand on fuel that had occurred, even though that information has been out there very directly.
Matthew Franklin from Capital Brief.
Hi, Prime Minister. Matthew Franklin from Capital Brief.
Hey.
Earlier in the week in Parliament, this is a different topic altogether. In Parliament, you were accused of having a secret plan to expand the size of Parliament. That came because your Special Minister of State thinks it's a good idea. You said at that in question time you were highly satisfied with the 94 of 150 seats you hold in the House of Representatives, and you didn't think that your National Secretary would be happy if you tried to upset that. At the end of the table here sits the one of your senators for the ACT who represents 228,000, I believe, ACT people. People in Tasmania, your senators, represent 80,000 people or thereabouts. My question to you is, in a world where we'd like to have the idea of, you know, one vote, one value, with respect, were you being serious or were you being flippant?
No, I was being very serious about the House of Representatives and the quotas which are there. It's in our constitution that Tasmania have 5 seats, and that isn't going to change. And I was very serious about the fact that in my view, and people will have different views, but I have never been engaged for 1 minute about an expansion of the size of the House of Representatives. I know that's not a uniformly held view, and that's fine, because there's an argument about when I was elected there were about 90,000 people, I think, in my seat, and now there's about 145,000. I understand all of that. But in today's world as well, I mean, I have to respond to the real world as it is. And the sort of campaign that would be run against an expansion of Parliament would, in my view, be not healthy for our democracy and would end up where it was with the, remarkably, I think, at this time, the fact that the coalition used question time of all things to talk about that this week, I found quite bizarre, frankly, given that they didn't ask, the Shadow Treasurer didn't ask a question of the Treasurer yesterday on the last question time before the budget. Says everything about their priorities. My priority is getting on with things, and that's what I intend to do.
Prime Minister, it's 1:30. Would you mind hanging around for a bit longer to answer a few more questions? We've just got a few more journos who've been waiting patiently for their turn.
Sure.
And the next is Anna Henderson from SBS.
Very lucky. Thank you for taking the time to take our questions. I think there are a few more hoping for the same treatment. Prime Minister, we took to the streets this morning and one construction worker said he thought your address to the nation last night was a load of rubbish. He said that there was nothing in it, but that's because he's worried about his job. It's one of those sectors which is at the front lines of what could unfold over the coming months. It's a sector with 1.3 million Australians working in it. Every cost has gone up, from piping to plastic to petrol, and most builders are on fixed contracts. So how are they going to sustain their workforce over the coming months? The question I have is, will the industry get under stage 4 of the National Fuel Plan a priority for fuel supply? Do you see that as necessary? And what do you say to people in that particular industry who are now wondering if they'll have a job to come back to after Easter?
Well, construction industry is important, and one of the issues that we've been dealing with in the meetings in rooms I sit around is PVC piping, for example. That's so important. Look, we'll continue to do what we can to engage, but part of what last night was about as well was saying we recognise there are challenges there. This is not something that we asked for, but something that we are dealing with practically, going through not just issue of fuel, but fertiliser, PVC pipe, all of these things that go into. So, you know, we are doing and will do the best that we can to work through those issues, but there are real pressures as well, and we wanted to acknowledge that. You know, there is a war on the other side of the world, but it is having an impact here. And it's having an impact here that won't disappear if President Trump had have announced during this lunchtime address that it was over. The tail of it will continue for some time. Our job is to minimise the impacts which are there, and that's something that we'll continue to do.
And will they get that stage 4 critical sector reassurance?
We are way away from stage 4, we're at stage 2. And our objective is to continue to work to stay at stage 2. What we've done through the National Cabinet, though, is to foreshadow and to do that very deliberately, to say we are thinking through what are the contingencies, if you like. How long could this last? You know, is it possible that if someone here knows exactly the date when it will end, please ask it in a question, and you'll you know, do something that Australia wants to see, I think. But the truth is we're living in uncertain circumstances. That's just the truth. And to pretend otherwise is not real. What our job is to deal with it as best as possible, understand that people are anxious about that. They're anxious if you turn up to a petrol station, there's not petrol there, but you're also anxious if some of the supplies, as part of that supply chain that you're involved with, if you're uncertain if they're going to be there months ahead. But that's why we have put forward the 4 levels. We would only go from 2 to 3 first through a National Cabinet process. We're working, and as well, the fuel supply coordinators working through all of those other issues as well with states and territories about supply of things that are critical.
Thank you.
Chloe Burris from Network 10.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chloe Burris from Network 10. I'd actually like to just follow up on your answer to Anna's questions. You say, obviously, there are a lot of uncertainties, but I think the public was looking to your national address last night for some clarity. So when you talk about the challenges ahead, can you be a bit more specific about what that is, how bad it could be, and what that looks like for the average Australian family or worker?
Well, what I don't want to do is to pretend that there are absolute certainties going forward. I'm not going to do that because that's just not real. Because we don't know how long this will go for. We don't know when it will end, and therefore the consequences of this are connected with that. What we can do is to say where we are now, to encourage voluntary measures, which is what we're doing, encouraging people to take what they need, to keep the economy moving, to make it very clear that we're not in a position of saying this is like COVID, which is one of the things that has been around over recent weeks. I can assure you that people want to look at comments on my social media. I'm sure you can find comments there because we've got emails saying, are we going to have lockdowns? Are we going to be able to see people at Easter? People, because they've gone through in this country the global financial crisis, then they've gone through COVID. Now this is an issue. That uncertainty is there. All we can do is to provide reassurance of where we are now, but also to make it clear that we have plans to adjust any mechanisms if things do deteriorate, as the plan says. Level 3 is ongoing supply disruptions. If that occurs, it hasn't occurred to this point in time. Okay, there's in terms of the amount of supply which is there. But what there has been, because of the spike in demand, is that some people have been doing it really tough.
It is going to be a tough Easter. Do you think it'll still be a tough Christmas by the end of the year?
Oh, we will come through this. We will come through this. And my job is to provide appropriate reassurance, which is what we are doing, that governments are working together. There were reports, for example, that the states and territories hadn't agreed to the GST to further reduce fuel costs. Those reports have been proven to be not correct. How? Because we're able to work with different state and territory governments across the political spectrum to achieve an outcome that is in the national interest. We'll continue to do that each and every day.
On that note, please join me in thanking the Prime Minister for his press conference today.